Is it just me, or has the last week gone really fast? Welcome everyone to this week's WARNO Dev blog, once again on a Thursday, just to add to my confusion. I'm blaming Mad Matt for all of this. So in there, welcome Eugen say, after last week's sizzling info drop of WARNO's upcoming milestone Oudinot, the time has come to detail the first of the two new divisions. Let's welcome to the stage NATO's multinational mixed Berlin Command Division. Now, to reiterate, Oudinot will be bringing two new previously undisclosed divisions to WARNO's base game. These battle groups will be made available for free to all owners of the early access version of WARNO. This is Eugen's present to all the players who have supported WARNO's development by getting the early access version of our sprawling real-time strategy World War III battle simulator. But let's get into what that actually means for the Berlin Command Division. So the first heading here is the Battle for Berlin 1989. We already detailed our war scenario, the so-called Battle for Berlin, which influences the inclusion of our multinational Berlin Command. Made up of the three major NATO garrisons in West Berlin, the United States, United Kingdom and France, the battle group would have had the unenviable task of defending a NATO outpost surrounded on all sides deep in Warsaw Pact territory. I'm putting the map up just to remind you of exactly how surrounded they were. With WARNO's Warsaw Pact strategic offensive raging across the inner German border in the early summer of 1989, an attack on West Berlin would be inevitable and begin as soon as the first shots of World War III would have been fired. Berlin Command would count on the forces already present in the city, of course undoubtedly reinforced in secret by NATO through covert means in our March to War build-up. This would present a unique mix of troops and material, tasked with delaying the overwhelming Soviet and East German forces for as long as possible. The NATO battlegroup would face brutal urban combat, dwindling supplies and a lack of heavy weaponry. Little help from the outside could be expected, but Berlin Command was ready to put up a hell of a fight regardless. And then the next subheading we get Berlin Command detailed. So what can you expect from the new Berlin Command battle group in WARNO? First off, it is an internationally mixed division, offering a lot of unit choices from the various NATO nations, the UK, USA, France and West Germany, but each in small numbers. In most cases this means you won't be able to get more than one card of a specific unit. If you want more, say, armor, you need to choose a different model from another nation. Some choices will be purely cosmetic, e.g. the French and American supply trucks will feature the same stats. However, you'll be dealing with very different weapon systems in most instances. Berlin Command will call on the forces of various garrisons present, the American Berlin Brigade, the British Berlin Infantry Brigade and the French Forces Françaises à Berlin. West Germany, though officially not military present in West Berlin, could call on some reserves and ad hoc troops that were present. A curious mix of troops and vehicles is the next subheading. A feature of the Berlin Command is that the arsenal, especially heavy units, are a bit outdated. Obviously, why would you put your most advanced and newest tanks in a formation where everybody knew it would not last maybe more than 3 days? And no commander would want their most modern equipment to fall into the hands of the enemy so quickly. Therefore, the three NATO garrisons did not enjoy the state-of-the-art technology that their comrades in arms would bring to bear on the battlefields in West Germany. For instance, the American Tank Company was one of the few to upgrade from the M1 to the IMP-1, but it's not the M1A1. The British squadron in Berlin did not transition to the more advanced Challenger like its parent regiment. Instead, it will retain the Chieftain Mark X. As for the French, they kept the older AMX 13/90 far into the mid-80s until switching them out for the AMX 30B, but not the B2. On the other hand, the NATO troops in Berlin had their equipment and organizational tables tailored to them, taking into account its envisioned urban warfare role. In this way, the American Brigade's infantry featured a special light infantry TONE, with Humvees and small motor pools of M113 APCs to be used depending on the mission. Another American trait was that its infantry squads were equipped chiefly with M67 recoilless rifles instead of the Dragon ATGMs, the former being more practical during house-to-house fighting. The British Brigade, most APCs were repurposed into fire support vehicles by the addition of the Raden turret with a 30mm autocannon, creating the FV432 Raden, a vehicle unique to UK's Berlin Brigade. Another feature was the use of the striking urban camouflage pattern with its squares and rectangles, and this will be found in-game on British vehicles such as the Chieftain 10 Rovers and the earlier mentioned FV432 Raden. So what can you expect in-game? Well, there's a lot, let's put it that way. Some vehicles and units are actually new and have been put in here in italic, and I'll try and point those out as I go through. So first we have logistics. Prepared well in advance with its mission engaging the enemy on its own turf makes Berlin Command have a generous allocation of unit slots in this category. Command vehicles include a larger choice of Jeeps, the Rover CP, the P4PC and the Humvee CP, as well as the VAB PC and the M577. Supply units come as lightweight Unimog munitions, the medium French TRM 2000 log, or the American M35 supply, and the heavier British Bedford supply truck. The single card of the new American UH-1H supply helicopters will also be available. These are one of the aforementioned new units. Let's move on to infantry. So, being an oversized infantry division with a dedicated mission of holding out in urban combat for as long as possible allows the Berlin Command to count on maximum squads in terms of the cheapest series of slots. So expect a lot of choices when it comes to infantry. So the Americans will bring the standard selection of MPS, HMG teams, engineers and the new Berlin light rifles, again with the M67 RCL. This is one of the new units. The British offers the RMPS military police, the HMG, the gun group, the rifles, the Wombat RCLs, the Milan ATGMs and the Terrier Pioneers. Point to note that the Territorial Army Reserves didn't originate from the United Kingdom but were rather formed from British emigrants and residents in West Berlin. Also, in case of a battle for Berlin, the RAF personnel from the then closed RAF Gatow Air Base would have made a provisional 4th Infantry Battalion in the Berlin Infantry Brigade. In-game, they will make up the new RAF Rifles, a large 12-man squad with older small arms, the Sterling, the SLR, etc. It should also be noted that they will be lacking in training and experience. There will also be a new Rover Wombat to provide light fire support. The French are represented with the Prévoté, the HMG teams, the Milan 2 ATGM teams, the Grenadier Voltigeurs and Sapeurs. The West Germans are deployed with locally mustered Heimatsuchen, and obviously complementing the troops present are the Leader command variants distributed as usual along with each class of infantry. In terms of artillery support for the Berlin Command, it is sizable, but only offers light pieces. The Americans can pack a punch fielding both the M125 and the M106 self-propelled mortars, and the new M198 155mm towed howitzers, as well as a handful of M109A2s. The British provide the light-towed 81mm mortar, and the French feature the self-propelled VAB PM81 mortar and the heavier towed MO 120 RT61. Now, tanks are where things are perhaps a little bit more limited, but anti-tank weapon systems will be available in large numbers. Slots, cost and availability are average. So first up, the Americans, which rely on the IMP-1 tank backed up by the M1025 Humvee TOW 2 and the M901A3 ITV ATGM carriers, as well as a few M728 CEV tanks. The British bring along the brand new Chieftain Mark 10, which is actually identical to the Chieftain Mark 9 in stats and model, but features a unique Berlin urban camouflage scheme instead. The new FV432 Raden fire support vehicle will also be available here. The French bring the most tanks, even though they are all older AMX 30Bs. They also kept a few AMX 13/90 in storage, which will be available. These are obviously one of the new vehicles for the game. The deadly P4 Milan 2 can also be encountered. Okay, let's move on to recon. So while many recon troops will be present during the battle for Berlin, few were combat equipped. What's the need for reconnaissance if you know the enemy would come from all sides? This category has a decent amount of slots, but primarily focused on boots on the ground choices. The Americans field the regular scouts as well as the Green Berets Detachment A saboteur squads. These special forces were stay-behind units tasked with destroying key infrastructure after any NATO surrender to hamper the Warsaw Pact forces as much as possible and deny Berlin being used as a logistical hub. The British will feature some light vehicle recon units such as the Ferret Mark II and the FV-721 Fox, in addition to infantry scouts that can also be fielded. The French recon troops amount to the standard Éclairs, with a nimble Alouette 3 helicopter providing eyes in the sky. In terms of AA, this is one of the division's weaker categories. Light anti-aircraft guns and manpads provide only the most basic of anti-air screens. The American forces fielded the heaviest equipment in the form of the M163 Pivads. Of course, Stinger teams are never far away and can be deployed. The British bring along their own Javelin and Javelin LML units, while the French feature the Mistral as well as the 5.3 T2 20mm guns, either towed or on the self-propelled Trask variant. In terms of helos, the NATO garrison only fielded a few helicopters and no combat variants. However, in Eugen's march to war, several weapon kits were smuggled into the city ahead of the Warsaw Pact offensive. As such, slots in this category are present but few and expensive. The only two cards of British Gazelle's SNEB and Lynx Mark 7 Hellarm are featured. In terms of air, much like the previous category, no actual combat aircraft would have been stationed in West Berlin. The ones present would have been targeted in the first minutes of the war. However, a few air assets will be available to Berlin Command, stemming from some rather unique sources. Much like their helicopters... Oh, this is going to be really good. So much like their helicopters, the ever-inventive British dismantled some of their Harriers and smuggled them in parts into West Berlin. The Harriers have then been rebuilt using whatever small piece of infrastructure to take off and land from city parks to bombed-out streets. Several variants present from the AA to the cluster, HE and rocket variants, but in minimal quantities. VTOL aircraft, people, VTOL! Shame the Harrier has such a horrific turning circle. Now, after the battle for Berlin begins, in a show of support, NATO makes at least one concerted attempt to help the besieged defenders. They divert some of their long-range strategic planes for a one-shot Hail Mary bombardment, similar to a single massive Western Allied air attack during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. For that purpose, France agrees to part with some of its precious Mirage 4 strategic bombers, which for this operation have been turned into long-range bomb trains. In further covert dimension, the Americans sneak some of their very special new F-117A tactical stealth bombers equipped with laser-guided bombs into the operation. Hello everyone, and please welcome the F-117A tactical stealth bomber to Warno. That's right folks, fans of Wargame, it's time for the Nighthawk to make its appearance. This is where I sit and hope the Nighthawk gets added to other divisions, because I just want to play with the Nighthawk and be an air spammer like everyone else. So honestly, I think of all the list there, the most exciting thing was actually the air tab, from the British being so ingenious as to dismantle Harriers, smuggle them in, and then manage to rebuild them in Berlin, which is obviously slightly ridiculous, but is perfectly possible. I mean, we've done silly stuff like that before. And then, of course, the Nighthawk. Really pleased to see that. But Eugen go on to say in conclusion, the Berlin Command is a very infantry-centric division, honed in fighting in a heavily congested urban environment. There is an excellent choice of units excelling in close combat, backed up by good logistics and many anti-tank weapon systems. The battle group lacks the most modern tanks, so will be unable to mount a heavy armoured fist through the enemy forces. Artillery pieces are numerous but light, while on the other hand anti-air and helicopter assets are few and far between. Air is a mixed bag, of course, with either some close air support combat jets or specialised bombers. Berlin Command is well situated for urban or dense terrain and defensive operations, but suffers from an unbalanced distribution of heavy units, air and support equipment. But they get the Nighthawk, what else do they need? And that is the end of this week's devblog. Thank you everyone for watching. Please do remember that this Friday is the Friday Night Warno event, where Protoss will be joined over on the SD League Twitch channel by one of the Eugen devs, who will take part in a fun 2v2 tournament and do a little bit of talking about the game's development and things like that. That will be starting at 7 PM CET, so please do tune in for that. As ever, for those of you who do not have Instagram, hang around and I will show you the few Instagram pictures that Eugen have put up this week. Otherwise, thank you everyone for watching and have a fantastic weekend. So first up we have this image of a Russian tank, which I believe was put up on Halloween because it's titled Trick or Treat. Next up is a lovely shot of one of the leopards in the armory, part of the armory rework sneak peeks, and there will be more to come, they say. Next up is a shot of a tank from the Berlin Infantry Brigade, sporting its new square grey, black and white camo. And then here is a special treat, a lovely front shot of the F117A, the Nighthawk itself, in all its glory from the front in the new armory. And the title they've put against this is just simply Flash Message. Obviously, hinting at the stealth aspect. And then finally we have a very nice little video clip of what is going to be fighting on one of the new Battle for Berlin maps. I don't know if there's one map or going to be multiple, but this looks like it's certainly one of them, where we can see forces from both sides engaging within that city and around it. And that is everything again for this week. That was actually quite a long dev blog for the sheer amount of information that was in it. So thank you again for watching. I hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll see you all soon.